Good morning and hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar by Conscia Cybersecurity. Thank you for being here with us today. And today we're going to be talking about state-of-the-art vulnerability management and incident response. My name is Ewan Hubac. I will be your speaker. I am currently responsible for the cybersecurity portfolio at Conscia. I've had the chance to be in industry for about 12 years now, and I've specialized in incident detection and response, as well as cyber threat intelligence. So the topics we will cover today, I've had the chance to have a first-hand experience on them. So please do not hesitate to ask questions. In the Q&A section, we will have a dedicated moment towards the end of this webinar where I will do my best to answer them. So a few words about Conscia. We are a leading provider for services in Europe. We do focus on 3 areas of interest: networking, hybrid cloud, and cybersecurity. So we've got over 1,000 customers today, and we partner with the core players in our industry: Microsoft, Cisco, Palo Alto, VMware, and the like. Today, we'll be focusing on other things, so let's move on to the topic of the day. So here, just a few numbers to illustrate the sheer dimension of the potential challenge that comes with managing vulnerabilities. There are a lot of known vulnerabilities in the digital world, and there are even more unknown vulnerabilities. And managing these, as we're going to see in a moment, can be a tough challenge. So there's never a bad time to ask yourself these questions. Are you doing enough to protect your organization? And we're going to give you a couple of keys today to maybe crank it up. So today we'll be, of course, focusing on describing the problem we want to tackle. And we will go into practical illustrations of 2 cases. 2 will be focused on vulnerability management and 1 more on incident response. And we will be talking about a couple of surrounding topics, in particular cyber threat intelligence, all along this presentation. So let's get started with why do we want to manage vulnerabilities in the first place? Well, vulnerabilities are the best way for an attacker to enter your information system. Vulnerabilities are pretty much on every digital system, and because of their sheer number, we cannot patch them all. So because vulnerabilities can lead to huge business disruptions, such as data theft, data exposure, data corruption, or disruption of your business services, or even misdirection for your customers onto malicious sites, as example, it is important to address vulnerabilities. And one point which is very often overlooked is that there are 2 key links between an attacker and its target. First off, one link is geopolitics, because this gives attackers motivation to cause harm to your organization. And the second one is vulnerabilities, because this gives them a mean, actually, to cause harm to your organizations. And we're going to be focusing on vulnerability management today. I think it's pretty clear that every organization has a lot of vulnerabilities to manage, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in some cases. And ideally, we would like to be in a position where we can prevent the exploitations before it's actually even attempted. So some of the key questions we will answer today, or try to answer, or contribute, will be, where do we start when we've got this huge list of CVs? What do we do next? And can we do it fast? So in the first case, we will see this morning, we will be focusing on vulnerability management. And the idea will be, are we in a position where we can measure our level of vulnerability exposure? So there are a couple of 5 essential questions that can help you gauge where you stand today. I will get back to these questions on the next slide, but this should give you a sense already of the underlying complexity of answering these with accuracy at any given time. However, answering these questions will be extremely important in educating your security posture and how to prioritize the way you manage your vulnerabilities. Now, there is actually a difficulty also in here, is that answering these questions is actually based on the assumption that it is actually possible to know the state of an information system at a given time. And this is very ambitious because today we are in a very different situation that we used to be in the 20th century, where at the time we had few systems, few network architectures, few applications. And it made sense at the time to try to validate the conformity of an information system to a frame. Today, this is completely different. It's dramatically opposite. Information systems are composed of different systems in different versions, different architecture types. You can bring your own device. You've got Internet of Things. You've got industrial control systems connected to it. So it is a very difficult challenge to get this tight. However, there definitely are ways to do it. So in our case one, really the idea is to find practical way to measure the level of exposure for your vulnerabilities. The ambition is to prioritize them so you can start with the most sensitive one. And on the right side, I try to illustrate a simple workflow, as simple as possible, in fact, to try to answer these questions automatically. As you can see, this needs to rely extensively on orchestration and integrations. And each of the 5 questions we mentioned in the previous slide will have to be asked to a different piece of technology. In some cases, you want to ask your CMDB, your patch management solution, your SIEM, your log manager, and so on. And basically, at each stage, it's an opportunity for you to potentially create an incident or maybe prioritize the patching or the virtual patching of that vulnerability. And the outcome of that process will be a list of vulnerabilities prioritized by what I will call exposure. Do you have any vulnerabilities that can be exploited right now? As example, this should be at the top of your list. And this approach is actually highly sophisticated. It relies extensively, as I said, on orchestration and integrations in a dynamic environment. So this is highly prone to breaking down at some point. It's quite expensive in terms of design and build and actually maintenance as well. But because it also gives you solely a list of prioritized vulnerabilities, it doesn't tell you what to do next. So while this is still a great way to do it today, I would like to focus on a better way. And this is how we're going to jump into our case number 2. And here, we are not going to focus on knowing ourselves or knowing our information systems, but we are going to look at the outside. And instead of looking at the level of exposure, we're going to be looking at the likelihood for vulnerabilities to be exploited by potential threat actors. And this will go a long way into helping us prioritizing which vulnerability we want to mitigate first. So how do we do this? Well, we do have another set of suggested questions, 5 of them. And these are a little bit more complex to answer than the previous ones. Are there any known threat actors that target your interest, your industry, your geography, your partners? Are these threat actors known to be sophisticated? Are they currently leading a live campaign against your interests? Do you have any way to detect their presence on your information systems through indicators of compromise, through their tools, techniques, or malware as well? That could lead to vulnerability exploitation. And most importantly, is there any course of action to mitigate their actions and the damage they could cause? Answering these questions will have a similar outcome to the ones that we already looked at before, because it will inform your security posture and your prioritization process. But here is a great opportunity, is that threat actors now are very much organized like a company. They invest in developing digital weapons. They will use them, and they need a return on investment. So by looking closely at what threat actors are doing, not only we know what they are doing now, but we can have some level of confidence of telling you what they're going to be doing next. And this practice of forecasting and anticipating threats is called cyber threat intelligence. Today, I will show you practical applications of cyber threat intelligence. We will not go into the details of how it works, in general, and what are all the moving parts, but we really focus on how can it help us to prioritize vulnerabilities and incident response. So let's have a look at basic information around vulnerabilities. Most organizations will usually create a link or relationship between a given vulnerability and indicators of compromise. Typically, you'll find IP addresses, file hashes, command lines, things like that. But here, it's very difficult when you have a list of CVEs, a list of vulnerabilities and related IOCs. It's very difficult still to prioritize them. You can use these IOCs for threat hunting and to update your security policies on your security controls to prevent, hopefully, exploitation of that vulnerability. But you have too little context to prioritize vulnerabilities against each other. So let's have a look at a practical way that cyber threat intelligence can help you here. And for this exercise, getting back to the challenge, we will try to measure the likelihood that a given vulnerability can be exploited. And in this example, we'll start with a vulnerability, and we will see conceptually how cyber threat intelligence can help us. And the first thing that cyber threat intelligence can tell you in regards to vulnerabilities is, do we know of any live campaigns currently targeting that vulnerability out there in the wild? And progressively, we're going to bring more objects to that graph, and we're going to link more and more dots, so we get a good understanding of the context around that vulnerability. For that given campaign, is it known to use any specific tool, techniques, procedures, or malware? And for this malware and this vulnerability, do we know any ways to mitigate them? In the mitigation, so this object is called course of action, you will find such things as a relevant patch or way to virtual patch, a way to organize your incident response, suggestions for threat hunting in regards to these threats. So course of actions are a great way to go fast in managing these risks. Also, cyber threat intelligence will be able to link indicators of compromise to these threats. As example, here's a list of IOC for that specific malware which is used in that campaign, which is currently undergoing in this example. And it doesn't stop here. Cyber threat intelligence can go very far. Some of the activities cover, as example, what we call attribution. So to some extent, we can attribute campaigns to specific actors or intrusion sets. In that case, I picked APT35 as an example. And if we are well informed, we can also say that this campaign actually is known to target specific sectors and specific geographies. If we put these two approaches side by side, we can really get a grasp of the context provided by cyber threat intelligence and how this can help you prioritize vulnerabilities. Some vulnerabilities could be, historical and they're not being actively targeted, and you could put them at the bottom of your list, while some others are currently targeting your interest in a current campaign, and we've got course of actions to help you mitigate them. This second case will put that vulnerability at the top of your priority list. So with the two cases we've had a look at, we are now in a position to estimate both the level of exposure for vulnerabilities and the likelihood that a given vulnerability is to be exploited against your organizations. And these two inputs are extremely valuable into your prioritization process. In fact, you don't need to limit it to your vulnerability management, as we will see in the case 3. So before I get into the case 3, which will be covering incident response, I would like to introduce a standard data model that we use in cyber threat intelligence. I introduced it a little bit already with a couple of graphs, but this goes way beyond what I've shown you already. And here I'm showing you an illustration of the STIX 2.1 data model. This is only an extract because there are more objects in that standard and there are more relationships. So this is just an extract to help you visualize and get a sense of how this works. And STIX 2.1 is born from Oasis, so a nonprofit organization that aims at structuring and sharing cyber threat intelligence. And what this standard gives us is actually pretty straightforward. It's a library of different objects that you can use to modelize cyber threats. And it also tells you which relationships can exist between each of these objects. The idea here is to be able to modelize a threat and to say, hey, this threat actor, we believe they are located in this region. They are currently leading campaigns. This is how they work. This is how they are organized. These are their modus operandi. This is how we can detect and mitigate them. STIX facilitates, speaking the same language and sharing that with the rest of your community. It's a modern standard. Today, it's the standard actually in our industry. And it is extremely interesting. So if you haven't heard of STIX 2.1 before, I really encourage you to get some information because more and more technology vendors gravitate towards supporting it natively. And that goes a long way into integrating the rest of your cybersecurity stack and security controls together. I won't extend too much on STIX right now, but yeah, if you would like to know more, please let me know and we can have also additional chats on the matter. Going back to the topic of the day, let's have a look at practical applications of cyber threat intelligence when it comes to incident response. I already hinted that the prioritization for vulnerabilities and incident response is actually very similar. So here, really the challenge will be of a similar size. How do we go within a SOC, as example, a security operations center, how do we go from tens or hundreds or even thousands of cybersecurity alerts to managing the top priority incidents first? How do you prioritize that list? What do we do next? Can we go fast? And you can probably guess it. Here, using a data model and relying on cyber threat intelligence will help you understand the context around an incident. So most of this graph you've seen before, just before actually, when I introduced the STIX data model. So you see the malware, the indicator objects, and so on. When working with incidents, we can introduce two new objects. The object at the top, which is the incident itself, is actually a grouping object, in a little bit like you would do in a case, where you can put your indicator of compromise, the malware, the course of actions, and so on. And this is what an analyst can work on. And this is what you can share with your partners and your stakeholders. And what makes an incident actually is that there has been a sighting of a potential presence of a threat on your information system. So a sighting can be a sighting of an indicator of compromise. It can be a sighting of a malware. It can be a sighting of a specific sequence of techniques that we can relate to some modus operandi and maybe a specific campaign. But the sighting really tells you, okay, now we are not gauging the likelihood anymore. We know something is going on. And this is why sighting will usually be bound to an incident. And having that context at your fingertips will help you prioritize your cybersecurity incidents in a very similar fashion to your vulnerabilities. And I see a couple of questions popping up, so thank you. I will answer them at the end. Keep them coming. Now that we've seen, how we can estimate our level of vulnerability exposure, looking at the insights, so knowing an information system, interacting with various pieces of security technologies, so we can get an order of magnitude for vulnerabilities and the way or the potential that they are being actually exploited now. We also had a look at the fact that we can estimate the likelihood that specific vulnerabilities will be targeted because we know about threat actors, we know about their campaigns, we know about their procedures, and we can estimate with some level of confidence that this is what they will target next. We can put that in a single view. So here we'll try to represent all of we've seen today, and we will be talking equally of vulnerabilities and incidents on that graph. So on one of the axes, the vertical one, that will be the level of exposure that the vulnerability can be exploited. On the horizontal axis, it will be the likelihood, and this will come with additional CTI context as well. Is this vulnerability, or are these tools, malware, and so on, known to be used right now in a campaign? Is there a non-sophisticated threat actor behind it? Or do we actually have a sighting of that threat on your information system already? That will increase the likelihood. And one other axis, which I won't cover into details today, will be the potential impact that this threat can have on your organization. This usually goes through what we can call asset classification. What are your critical accounts, your critical applications, services, network segments, endpoints, and so on. And having that classification integrating into your prioritization process will help you a long way to put the most important things at the top of your list. So taking this just a notch further, you can have some sort of heat map into these axes where the distance to the center will tell you, will give you a good sense of the priority to manage a given vulnerability or a given incident. So if we simply add a couple of objects on that graph, this maybe gives you a very good visual view of, actually we can prioritize now incidents and vulnerabilities together in the same process. An incident, usually, as I mentioned before, we'll put that at the top of your list because there's a sighting, there's been a specific use case triggered. But this gives you a sense that the composition of your exposure, the likelihood, and the potential impact will really help you a long way into changing the priorities of these different activities. Of course, as the context evolves in an information system and maybe even into a given attack, these priorities are dynamic. So coming back, after some time, you could definitely see some changes in that graph. But I think this is a very elegant way to visualize how priorities compete against each other, even if we're talking about different topics like vulnerabilities, incidents, and potentially others. All right, so let's just take a moment to reflect a little bit on the topics we've covered already today. So we know that there are ways to prevent vulnerabilities from being exploited before events are made, and that we can streamline prioritization both for vulnerabilities and incidents through three main metrics. The exposure, which is related to what is the capability for an attacker to exploit a vulnerability. The likelihood, which is related to the external threat context, that will tell you, is there a campaign or a threat actor behind specific threat that could lead to vulnerability exploitation. And also adding to the mix asset classification that will give you an accurate but mostly a realistic prioritization process. And cyber threat intelligence will help you make these decisions extremely fast, because one aspect I didn't insist in this webinar is that most of that you can automate. The way you enrich your vulnerabilities with cyber threat intelligence or your incidents, these can be all done through a threat intelligence platform or an orchestration platform. And most of that can be automated. Of course, humans need to stay in the loop to some extent, in particular when it comes to incident response. But the preparation of that case can be automated to a large extent. And last but not least, a standard data model exists to modelize threats. STIX 2.1 is used widely across the industry already. So if you are contemplating adopting new technologies, maybe you should put the compatibility with STIX 2.1 on your list. So now a couple of words about the fact that you're not alone and you don't have to do everything yourself, because I really believe we are in a fantastic ecosystem. You can work around cyber threat intelligence to get, the best of what's out there, with working with certs, working with industry partners in ISACs, as example, or CTI providers. You can work with technology providers to really streamline and automate as much as can be. But you can also work with service providers that, industrialize their processes and can really, really help you get up to speed on these topics in no time. You can capitalize on everything that's already available out there in the existing communities, but cyber threat intelligence also gives you a place where you can contribute back. Quick word about Conscia. We propose a cybersecurity assessment that can help you identify practical ways to improve vulnerability management and incident response in your organizations. So please feel free to get in touch to discuss. You'll find contact details on the last slide, and we'll be very happy to help. So that's it when it comes to, let's say, a good introduction to these topics about how can we do vulnerability management better, relying on cyber threat intelligence, as well as incident response, and how we can put all that together in a single view. Now is the time for Q&A, so I'm going to take a moment and we'll do my best to answer these questions. I see we've got a couple there, so let's get to it. All right, so we've got two interesting questions. All right. Okay, so I will start with a question, which is, what advice would you give to a fresh team who has never worked in IT security and are tasked with implementing a SIEM? So implementing a SIEM is a non-trivial activity, actually, because you have to take into account the knowledge of your information system and also set up detection rules that will help you detect the occurrence of threats on your information system. This is a complex topic because the traditional approach for SIEM editors is actually to propose detection rules that are based on compliance to a specific framework. Some will mention, NIST. Some will mention critical security controls from CIS. Some will mention their own framework. But this approach actually is based on the old approach, which is, hey, we believe we can know at any given time the state of our information system. And as I highlighted a little bit earlier in this webinar, this is extremely difficult to do. So a good way to do threat detection using SIEM technology is to look at the outside. Of course, you will still need compliance rules that come from these frameworks, as example, and that you decline in your own environment. But a great way to look at it is, hey, what can cyber threat intelligence tell us about the actual threats out there? And maybe we should focus on trying to detect the most widespread threats right now, the most common indicators of compromise, the most common techniques that occur right now. And there are a couple of ways that can help you along, a long way to work on that. And that can be, as example, combining the MITRE ATT&CK framework alongside cyber threat intelligence and alongside your own knowledge of your information system. So if you're a fresh team that has never worked in IT security, I would advise you to get some help, because the initial steps are crucial into defining, your roadmap and the design for your architecture and the way you're going to basically build and run it. I think I highlighted a little bit that there are many moving parts and there are modern ways to do it. So yeah, if you're fresh, I think getting some help from a consulting company will help you a long way. Let me know if you'd like to have a follow-up question to that one. I'm going to take another one, which is a difficult one, so I will do my best. I will read it out loud if you cannot read it right now with us. So well-known software can be easily solved by using vulnerability management solutions. Indeed, yes. But the problem is that they usually support a limited number of applications, commonly the most common used ones. So there are only there are so many invisible applications which are either developed by small companies or internally or only used in niche markets or regions like payroll solutions or government related solutions that exist only in one country. So how can we address vulnerability management for this invisible software, shadow IT, and how to even detect this software? All right, so this is a very complex question. You have to put vulnerability management into perspective of a wider cybersecurity practice. Vulnerability management is one way to protect your organizations, but there are many other ways. Some of us will tell you about zero trust. Some of us will tell you about segmentation. Some of us will tell you about identity, access control management, these kind of things. And also incident response processes as well. So we have to put vulnerability management into perspective that it's part of a wider ecosystem. It's cornerstone of it, but it's not the only one to address. And managing vulnerabilities for this kind of invisible software, as you call it, shadow IT and so on, I think having in-depth defense, zero trust approach, and best practices implemented will help you a long way into mitigating potential exploitation of these vulnerabilities on these lesser known solutions. So right now, my advice in managing this would be have a holistic cybersecurity roadmap, portfolio, practices. And when it comes to addressing these very specific vulnerabilities, you could totally partner up with specialists on the matter, like pen testers, red teams, or maybe some organizations that provide, what we would call product security incident response services that can actually put these tools to the test and come up also with recommendations to, mitigate these vulnerabilities, even if patching is not available. Network segmentation with access control will help you a long way with solutions like WAF, reverse proxies, things like that. But this is, as I said, a very complex topic. So I hope I gave you a hint of the general direction where you can start tackling this problem. And yeah, I think that's it for now, what I can share with you. Let's see, maybe we have some other questions coming in. Any general advice on how to stay up to date with common threats from the outside? Yes, of course. The difficulty of staying up to date is, I would say, is a challenge because today it's very difficult to find a single point of truth for everything. So you will find public organizations that will broadcast, information about threats that are known to address, their regions, public organizations, and things like that. So they will have their own websites. They can also provide that as a feed. But also you will have, things that are only accessible to specific cyber threat intelligence providers and things like that. So the best advice is to try to set up, in your team, a regular practice of getting that information onboarded, because the sources will vary widely. Some of it will come from the editors themselves. Some of it will come from your community, from your government. And putting that into a single place can be a good place to start. It can be unstructured, like a repository, but it can be also structured into a threat intelligence platform, an orchestration, or various other tools. A good way also to do that is to work with people that process that to a large extent for you. Actually, at Conscia, we do propose a free subscription to our Threat Insight newsletter that can help you keep up to date with the most recent known vulnerabilities and ways to mitigate them. So that would be, a very practical thing for you to do, and maybe look into the providers that share interests with your own context, because they will be the ones that give you, the most condensed things. One type of organizations I haven't talked about too much are your local certs, national certs even, or organizations which we call ISACs. So ISACs are communities that are regional or in specific sectors that help sharing, the threat intelligence around what's going on in their region and their communities. So that could be also a good option for you. There's not one way to manage, or to keep it up to date with common threats, unfortunately, but I think I give you a few hints on, maybe a starting point for you. I give you a moment to post maybe a few remaining questions. See a private question somewhere. Let's see. So there's a very interesting question that came through, talking about, the relativity of this topic. So is there any way of seeing your own organization, maybe status or maturity, against your peers in specific security areas? As example, are we over-investing in some area? Are we under-investing in some others? So a great way to do that is to go through the exercise of maturity assessment. This will usually tell you about your own posture, but providers will also be in a position to tell you, we've done this assessment with your peers, similar industry, similar region, and we can give you, a comparative standpoint about where you are at today. When it comes to the question of where should we invest, are we over-invested in some areas and are we under-invested in some others? There's an activity which I love to conduct, actually, which relies on compiling together your current state in terms of security posture against the non-state of external threat actors. And compiling, these are the areas where we're very strong. This is the areas where we're not so strong. Against, these are the actual capabilities of the threat actors that are known to target our industry and our geographies. So putting these layers on top of each other will definitely put into perspective which are the other areas that you overserve and which are the ones that you underserve. A good framework to conduct this activity is relying on the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, because they break down pretty well, the different vectors that can be used to cause harm to your organization. And because it's a standard more and more widely used, you will usually find it mapped, into the cyber threat intelligence that you will get into various reports from certs or from the industry. So working with this type of layered matrix will definitely help you a long way to find out, we are over-invested in this area, which is not an area that, threat actors are known to target for industry and our region. However, here is an opportunity for us to improve, maybe on a roadmap, or that we can use to educate our budget decisions, because the threat actors that are known to target our industry and our region, they actually focus on these vectors. So this gives you a very good starting point to, make technology decisions, budget decisions, roadmap decisions, and so on. So if you're not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK framework, this is another fantastic standard that I can only recommend you get familiar with. Okay, so I'm not seeing any further questions coming in. So I would like to take a moment to thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope you got something to take home today with you. Got to learn maybe a little bit about cyber threat intelligence and practical applications, maybe a new way for you to visualize priorities or how to prioritize vulnerabilities and incidents. We'd love to hear from you, feedback from this content. Again, we do provide maturity assessments at Conscia, so get in touch and we can really help you a long way to identify, practicalities of improving some of your processes or your security posture. Again, thank you all, and we'll see you on the next one. That was Conscia Cybersecurity. Thank you again for coming.